Hiya, it's Liam here, and if you like what we do at the podcast, please do consider supporting us from just £1. And if you love the show, from just £3 a month, you get early access on all of our content as well. All the details are in the show notes. With reaction and insights to the biggest stories and breaking news from the USA, and a little bit of history thrown in. This is America, a history in the making. Hello and welcome to this special episode of America, a history in the making. It is the day after the 2024 US election, and my word, there is a lot more to talk about than I thought we'd have to talk about at this point. And joining me to discuss it, instead of the usual parade of British people who don't really have any first-hand experience of the election, I'm lucky to be joined by a batch of voters and US citizens who can tell me more about what it's actually like to be in America at this particular time. So I'll go around the table and you can all introduce yourselves in turn. Felicia.
Sure, happy to start off, and thanks for having us, I guess, Liam. Definitely a different sentiment that I'm joining you today than I thought, but my name is Felicia Jadzak. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of a consulting company called Inclusion Geeks. I am based in Western Massachusetts, which is also the traditional land of the Nipmuc, Pocumtuck, and Nonotuck peoples. And yeah, I will say I voted for Harris, and I have a lot of thoughts that I'm still processing right now. But that's my quick intro. Thanks for having me on.
No, welcome to the show, Felicia. And Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie McManus. I'm actually located, I love Felicia that you included the native lands. So I'm located on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, the native lands of the Wampanoag Native Americans. I'm a Harris supporter. I've been volunteering all summer and all fall. And I own my own company. I'm a business strategist and money mindset coach. And I also run a podcast called The Weenie Cast, which hopefully inspires business owners to not just do good work that they love, but to also make a difference in the world.
Wow, that's amazing. Thanks, Katie. And we'll drop a link to your show in the show notes as
Oh,
well for
thank
anyone
you.
that wants to check that out. And finally, Nathan and Shannon.
I'm Shannon Ray. I'm in Forest Falls, California, and this is my hometown. I'm on the traditional lands of the Uhaviatam people in the mountains of Southern California. I'm an author and historian.
My name is Nathan Berger. I'm from Hampton Roads, Virginia, originally, the land of the Powhatan people. I now live in Forest Falls, California. I've been here about 10 years.
And firstly, I'm just going to stick with you, Nathan, Shannon, because you're in you're in quite a red part of California. Am I right?
Yes, we're in San Bernardino County, which typically goes red. And
Mm.
so going to the polling place is interesting because you sort of feel like you're dropping a little drop of blue into the into the red in our area. So and in California generally, since the results usually come in toward the latter part of the night on election night, I think as a California, I always felt kind of a little bit like, oh well, California always goes Democrat, and I vote Democrat, so it kind of doesn't count in a way. It's
Mm.
it's just sort of, oh well, I vote because it's my civic duty, but I kind of know which way it's going to go anyway because it's California, and especially in a red county, it just feels very marginalized in a sense.
Yeah. Do you feel like because you're one of the last states to for the polls to close, and because it's pretty much a given that those 54 electoral votes are going to go to the Democrats every time. Um, do you think there's a problem with sort of voter apathy in California, particularly with Democrats? Because there must be a sense of like, why bother?
I think there is in a way. I do know people who just don't vote because they sort of figure, oh well, it's going to go Democratic anyway, and I'm just one person. It's not going to matter. And so I think there is a little bit of voter apathy maybe in California.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, when I moved here, I was surprised at how red it actually is. Because I was always under the impression, you know, from the East Coast that California was the land of the blue. And when I got here, it was crazy to see all the pockets, how divided it is here, and how there are whole towns that are completely red, whole counties. And it was a shock to see all the Republican leaning supporters. And it's like, how does this state go blue every 4 years? Because there's so many Republican leaning people here. So it was, I couldn't believe it. I still can't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's bring in Katie and Felicia here because on that subject, I think we're probably all a little bit surprised at just how many states Trump picked up last night. What are
Oh
your
yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I am happy to go first. This is Felicia speaking. I said yesterday when people were asking me how I felt that I was nauseously optimistic, and I think today I'm looking back and thinking the nauseous was my, whether it's you call it subconscious or 2016 PTSD or just working in spaces that are very sort of under attack by what Trump and the Republican Party represents. Just the realization that yes, I think on the face of it, I am shocked that so many states did flip red, but I'm not surprised. What about you, Katie?
I'm with you. I couldn't shake this feeling yesterday, and I was taking a lot of hope from Alan Lichtman and the Seltzer poll. Which, if you're not familiar, Alan Lichtman has never been wrong in his predictions, and he was predicting that Kamala would win. And the Seltzer poll showed that she made incredible grounds in Iowa. And has been accurate, I think, 4 out of 5 elections. And so I was really leaning on those things as a gauge for things going the Democrats' way. And I hate to say it, but I'm actually not that surprised. Racism and misogyny runs very deep in this country. And I think it's a lot easier to point to a group of people and say, these are the people you need to be afraid of, rather than here is a doctrine that you need to be afraid of. I think
Yeah.
people's lived experience and like the little interactions that people have with others who they don't understand, they don't have the capacity to understand because they don't take a moment to get to know them. It's really easy to demonize and to dehumanize and vilify. And if Trump is really good at one thing, that's it. And I I think we're also in kind of a crossroads with our education system. Our education system has really fallen down on teaching people how our government actually functions. There are a lot of folks who are pointing to Harris and saying, well, she didn't do anything over the last 4 years. And you ask them, okay, well, what do you think she was able to do? And they're like, well, she should have done this, this, and this, not understanding that the role of a vice president is literally just to break ties in the Senate. And so there's not the knowledge base, I guess, for people to have an understanding of what is actually happening in our country.
But you're always going to be marred by that association to the administration because you are still part of the current administration, like regardless of how much power you're able to swing, right? And Harris was always going to struggle with that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because in the United States we do have a massive lag time for policies to come into effect and have impact, right? So a lot of the things that people are struggling with right now are actually things that Trump started when he was president last. And of course, Biden is our president right now. And so people are seeing things happening in their life, inflation, and different issues that are truly affecting Americans. And they're thinking, well, this is the guy that's leading the country right now. He must be responsible, not understanding that lag time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Nathan, Shannon, I mean, you live in a little pocket of red within sort of California, which is very blue. So you probably kind of are exposed more to sort of both extremes of the argument. But considering how close the polls were, are you surprised that there was a result as quickly as there was? Because I think I feel like myself and a lot of other people thought this was going to drag a lot.
Oh, I think we definitely thought that it was going to be at least a couple of days before we knew a result. I was very surprised when I got up and saw that they had already called it for Trump.
Mm.
I think that when there's, I don't know that I'm with Katie and Felicia. I don't know that I'm very surprised because if you have a siren blaring in your ears for 4 years, no matter how much you try to avoid it, you absorb. You're inculcated with that sense of alarm,
Mm.
and I think that was kind of playing in the background for all of us, even though we were hopeful that there would be a Harris presidency. I think we were all very hopeful, but it's been such a loud um, time with all of the Trump supporters that you can't completely avoid that. And I think it got through to all of us in a sense where we were, you know, alarmed and felt that it was going to actually happen, but didn't want it to happen, and we're hoping that it wouldn't happen.
Mm.
And I see we've seen, there's a little town, we're in the mountains, and there's a little town right at the base of the mountains where every week there would be people parading in pickup trucks with huge Trump flags and huge American flags, and getting out and being very vocal and screaming at people in cars and all of that kind of stuff. And when that's just present all the time, you kind of get a sense that and I think I was hoping that it was just a very vocal minority rather than something that would move the needle,
Mm.
you know?
I mean, speaking of minorities, and Felicia, I'll bring you back in here. One of the things that Trump managed to do successfully was to increase his vote share quite substantially amongst minority groups, particularly the Latino voters really seem to come out in support of Trump this time. Um, what is it about Trump's message that you think is resonating with non-white, non-male voters?
Well, California is very heavily Latino, as most people know. And, in my interactions with Latino people, and I've asked people, like, what is it that you find appealing about Trump? And there's a strange dynamic with people who have come into the country legally and have become citizens of the U.S. from Hispanic countries. They don't want other Hispanics that are not legal, that are not using the process and coming in legally, to come in. And it's a very strange, it's kind of like Latino on Latino hate, which is really strange. And I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll jump in here because I think what we're going to see, we've already seen it happen today, and we're going to see this in the next days, weeks, months, whatever it's going to be to come. There's going to be a lot of finger pointing, and there's a lot of data analysis and slicing and dicing of who voted for who. And yes, there were very surprising shifts in certain groups, like Latino men, for example. No surprise, other groups, Asians across the board voted overwhelmingly for Harris versus Trump. Black women almost, completely voted for Harris over Trump. So there will be a lot of finger pointing, but I think, and this I think speaks back to your point, Katie, we need to zoom out a little bit because when we look at marginalized and minority groups, what we have to remember is that there are very strong systems in place here. And so what we're seeing and why I think we're seeing these, it makes no sense to a lot of us, right? Like, how could you be someone who holds marginalized identities, who's going to be impacted directly by this, and vote for someone who's told you that he's going to hurt you and harm you? And we've seen this happen in 2016, like it happened before. The reasoning is because we have a very deep seated white supremacist culture at play here in the United States. We are a country, I was joking with my husband this morning, well, sort of morbid joking. I was joking that I thought it was going to be the series or the season finale of America, but it's actually the series finale of America. But we are a country that has been built on a very, very bloody, unstable, disgusting foundation of hurt, harm, supremacy. And it's coming back to, it's bubbling up for us, right? So when we look at different groups of identity groups in terms of voters, what we see is that playing out because we're seeing internalized racism, we're seeing internalized misogyny, we're seeing internalized all the isms where we're seeing folks who are being told, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, to try to align themselves closer to whiteness. There's so much to get into that we definitely don't have time to today, but there's so much to dig into around history of who was considered white in America and beyond, and how that's always been tied to politics. And I think that's what we're seeing with these certain groups. And we're seeing that, again, overwhelmingly, it's not up to any one marginalized group to quote unquote save us from someone like Trump. It really comes down to who holds power and who wants to, prop up these white supremacist systems and keep that in power. And that's really, unfortunately, I think what we're seeing happening in real time right now.
If I can yes and all of that, Felicia, at the base of it, if we look at relationships, so someone who was raised in an abusive family structure is far more likely to find a partner who's abusive, right? Not because they don't understand that like this person's going to hurt them, but because their nervous system is so accustomed to being treated that way that they're like, oh, well, this is normal, right? And I think wherever someone comes from, if they're going to be a Trump supporter, I think they're coming from some kind of system where the leader is this kind of caustic, malignant, narcissistic personality. And while they may understand that they could be harmful, it is more familiar to their nervous system than someone who is not that. And so I don't believe that it's actually a conscious decision. I believe it's something that like they're making on a nervous system level because their nervous system doesn't understand that there can be better and that they deserve better. I think this is also why a lot of Christian evangelicals are supporting Trump, even though he's been divorced twice. He's cheated on every single wife he's ever had. He's a rapist. He's broken laws. He's been convicted. These are all things that are contrary to, their gospel. And yet they're making an exception for him. And I believe that comes from, the people in these religious groups have had to make exceptions for leaders within those religious groups. There's some kind of like caveat that lets them off the hook for all of these moral transgressions that as a follower they would never do. But because that person holds power and is someone that you're supposed to look up to, oh, well, they get to get off the hook. And then you get, shown someone like Trump, and it's like, okay, well, he kind of fits that model. So he gets to, get a free pass as well.
What I think is so mad, sort of looking at this from the outside, is that I can kind of understand why people might gravitate towards the kind of the showmanship and the bravado of Trump, if the candidate he was up against was similarly unqualified or appeared as equally competent or incompetent as Trump. But he's up against a candidate who is immensely qualified and proven and experienced and clearly very intelligent and capable. So does it simply come down to the fact that Kamala Harris doesn't look like what people imagine a president to look like?
I don't know. I think, well, the only way that I could try to understand the Trump phenomenon in 2016 was, the cult of celebrity. And I felt at the time that there was a voting bloc. I've seen him on TV. He's like a boss. So we should vote for him.
Mm.
That sort of very superficial level of non-critical thinking and just buying into that cult of celebrity thing. Um,
And it
and
worked for Reagan
so,
as well, right?
yeah,
That's what I've.
it happened for Reagan
Mm.
too. Oh, he's a movie star. We know who he is, and we've seen him, and he plays characters that are rough and tough and that kind of thing. And I think there's a certain part of the electorate that does play in that arena, um, and that Kamala Harris just wasn't as big a celebrity, kind of, in a way, as Trump for some people. I do think the fact that she's a woman played a huge part in it. That we in this country don't see women as powerful at all because of the deep misogyny that's sort of built into our culture. And that was, I kept thinking this morning, okay, if it had been a male candidate, even a male candidate of color, would it have come out differently? I
Mm.
don't know what you think, Katie and Felicia, how the gender issue played, but I'd be interested in hearing what you think too.
Well, I think we've all heard all the people saying, well, she slept her way to the top. And no one ever says that about a man,
Mm.
No,
you know?
not
Um, and I mean, the fact that that would even be lobbied or lobbed at a presidential candidate is just absolutely disgusting.
it is.
Um, and I mean, it's not something that should be thrown at women regardless of what position they're running for. I don't care if it's a bus person at a restaurant or president of the United States. Like the fact that you're using your body to get some kind of position of power. I mean, it's a way to really degrade women and to reduce us down to the sum of our parts.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, Kamala Harris is a first generation biracial black South Asian woman. And I think a lot of us thought that would be a unifying factor. And the reality is that we are not in the majority, the people who think that, right? I think that the Democrats, I don't think it's just her identities. I think that the political party is also has a huge part to play in it. The whole way this played out with Biden running at first, dropping out, endorsing versus having a primary the way that the Republicans had, even though, of course, they came out with Trump. So, whatever. But we didn't have that chance to explore candidates. And now I am half Indian myself. I desperately wanted to see Harris ascend to the presidency for multiple reasons, not the least of which being representation for me personally. But at the same time, would I have voted for her had there been other candidates? I don't know, but we will never know that. And I think that the the challenge with being a Democrat is that the Republicans will lie, they'll cheat, they'll steal, and they'll tell you to your face that they're doing it and do it anyway. And for some reason, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why I'm not, deep enough into the political workings to be able to come up with a very succinct way of explaining it. But the Democrat Party has not been able to come together in order to come up with a meaningful plan to win. It's always about reacting and reacting. It's never about being proactive and bringing folks together. And so I think that's a big part of it too. I think she ran as brilliant a campaign as she could with the time allotted to her. And I think I'm already seeing a lot of flipping even in these last few hours this morning where the previous night people were like, this was the most amazing campaign ever, look at all the things that happened, all these people who came together. This morning I'm hearing and seeing this was the worst campaign ever, she ran terribly, she didn't do this, she didn't appeal to these people, she didn't do this. The truth is somewhere in the middle, right? I personally think she did amazing with the way this played out. However, the Democrat Party overall has a lot to figure out in the next 4 years, in the next 2 years, really, right? We have a chance to bring in more folks in 2 years. And I also don't want to lose sight of the down ballot elections and the down ballot initiatives that have passed or not passed as well, because we did see some wins and I don't know what that will translate into, but we have I believe it's two black senators, I want to say, from Maryland and Delaware, both women. We have our first ever trans congressperson who was elected. I'm very afraid for them, given what Trump has told us he is going to do around gender. But the fact remains that we elected our first ever trans congresswoman. And there's other wins as well across the country, too. But ultimately, I think that yes, her identities were never a help to her in this fight, and it's not just that alone.
I think one mistake that was made is Biden never expected to drop out of the race. The entire 4 years, he was confident that he was going to be the nominee. And because of that, he didn't really give room for Harris to come to the forefront and get her more exposure. So, him expecting to be reelected again, he was, the way I see it, he was thinking, well, in my second term, I can push her forward and get her ready for her candidacy. But because he did drop out and everything was so quick, the last 4 years, she never had a chance to kind of show who she was. And I think that hurt a lot.
I mean, we criticised a lot of the time, Biden for not dropping out because he would have been beaten badly by Trump. But I mean, looking at the results and how a lot of the states ended up, I mean, okay, they might have been close, but when you look at that map, there's a lot of red there, and the Rust Belt has gone red. Trump has really kind of won by a landslide when you look just at the map. Um, would Biden have done any worse?
I think so. I think yeah, he would have done worse.
He would have done worse.
But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
I think, it's interesting because it's one of those, it's essentially a marketing problem that the Democrats have. We all say, like in the last 8 years, I don't know about you three, but my friends and I were all like, oh my God, like I just want to not have to think about who's running the country. I don't want to hear that the president's tweeting this and that and whatever every single day on the news. Like, why does that have to happen? And I think we've quietly very much appreciated the Biden administration for quietly doing the work of the country and getting things passed. And, Harris's dedication to her role as vice president and all these things. And yet, just because we want it doesn't mean it's good marketing, right? Like, one of the things that the Republican Party is really good at is, regardless of whether they won or not, taking credit and just saying, hey, listen, we did this, and banging their own drum about it. I think this is something that the Democrats have to learn. Well, we have to start doing better. We have to start like taking credit for each tiny little win we get and announcing it far and wide to everyone so that it starts getting imprinted in everyone's minds. Oh yeah, they did that. No, yeah, they did that. Because when we come to election time and we give them like a long list of all the things, it doesn't permeate, right? Because they're not pointing back to, oh yeah, I remember you guys talking about that. Just like they do with Republicans and with Trump, like they can point back to, oh yeah, that psycho tweet I saw about this. Yeah, I recall that. It becomes kind of like this amorphous thing that like, oh, cool, yeah, but you immediately forget about it because it's not already planted. The seed hasn't already been planted in your memory bank.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying too, Katie, around the lag time and how policies are rolled out and impact people and how that timeline plays out. Because if we look at it, like Biden has done so much in his presidency that has been very positive, and he was handed a huge mess. A lot of people have been saying, and I've been hearing this, oh, well, we were better off 4 years ago. No, we weren't. 4 years ago, we were seeing body bags and COVID deaths, and, Trump supremely mishandled COVID. Biden came in and dealt with that, dealt with all sorts of other stuff. So again, Biden's not my most favorite president either. I did vote for him. I would have preferred a different candidate, but he did so much with what he was given. And to your point, Katie, like nobody talks about it, or even in the Democratic Party, we don't have the way to explain or showcase or push back. And so it is a really strong marketing engine that has come up in this cult of personality and this cult of straight out lies. And the Democrats are playing using a playbook for a game that does not exist anymore. And that's a huge, huge issue for us right now. And so, going forward, we're going to have to really rewrite it because, we're literally talking about, is this going to be a fascist country? Is it going to be an authoritarian country? This is not going to be the same kind of ball game that we have had experience with up until this point. And so it's not even just about figuring out how do we get better at marketing ourselves and highlighting our wins, but we're really going to have to figure out what does pushing forward and resisting and making movement and progress look like when the landscape is so dramatically different and we are really in brand new territory here.
I think that, yeah, I think the biggest disappointment for me is that um, liberal values like are not embraced in this new environment, and it's this sort of this rise of nationalism and fascism that is emblematic of this win that is most disturbing. Why are we not in this country embracing taking care of one another and the sort of more liberal values that we were founded on, really, than taking this sort of, hate and greed won out last night, and that's a very disappointing picture to have to look at.
The problem is that on the other side of the coin, the MAGA base and a lot of Republicans now would argue that Trump does represent the sort of the individual, the everyday person, the anti-establishment, and the values that come with that. So it just to me feels like the the value systems between Democrats and Republicans are just so polarized that you can look at exactly the same thing and see the complete opposite.
You know, whenever I think about the differences between Republicans and Democrats, especially in this current era we're living in, is I imagine, someone walking into a bookstore that has a magazine rack. And my philosophy around buying magazines, most of the time people buy magazines for the person they want to be. Right. I don't know if the rest of you have gone and bought one of those holiday recipe magazines and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be that person who makes all the fancy things for Christmas or for Thanksgiving. And then you never cook anything out of it, but you keep it around because that's kind of like you're attached to this idea of who you want to be.
It's
Right.
aspirational, yeah.
It's aspirational, right? Like workout magazines and, like Harvard Business Review. Like who actually sits down and reads that cover to cover? Right? It's something that lays around your house that you can say, oh yeah, well, I'm the kind of person who buys this kind of magazine. And I think that is what the Republican Party has gotten really good at selling its constituency is like you get to vote for who you want to be. Right? You want to be rich, you want to be this. You want all these things. We're the party of that. And so come and vote for us and you get to join our club, right? And versus, a Democrat who walks into a bookstore, they go to the children's section. They pick out, a few different children's books that they loved as a child and then they donate it to a school. Because they want to share that love of reading, that empathy building that, some children's books are really good at. Um, and unfortunately, that's just not as sexy.
Well, and also like to your point with this metaphor, Katie, I think I was looking at the stats this morning and Trump's voter base is by and large more trending towards, less educated, uneducated folks.
Yep.
Democrats and Harris's voter base trending much more on college educated and educated in general. And, I do think that there has been a breakdown in both just how we have failed our educational systems in general and a breakdown in critical thinking, which is across the board, not just limited to any one generation. And, the other thing is that there will always be this element of appealing to fear. And I think that's where the Democrats don't do that. I don't think they should. I don't think they should have to, but I think the Republicans do this very, very well. They appeal to fear. And that is where there are a lot of fearful, angry people. A lot of them are white men, right? But not exclusively, as we know. And there's just a lot of hatred and fear. And the Republican cult and the Republican Party and everyone around this, even though we've seen, all of Trump's former cabinet members saying they would never vote for him or they would not work for him again, and, establishment Republicans saying they did not support him or whatever, but he still represents this message of I'm addressing the fears and the hate that you have right now. And the Democrat Party is addressing love. And that was not the right message as it turns out, unfortunately. The support, the unity, the love has not been as strong as us versus them, right? And I think that we've seen this with Reagan and in general with American politics over the generations. It's been this whole individualistic approach, right? That's really come up and built up a lot of how America operates. And I think that's playing a big part in this. And I also don't want to discount too, we're of course not just in our own little bubble in the world. We're connected to world events. And, one of the things that I've been doing this morning myself has been reading BBC News because I don't want to support the New York Times. Like, what a time to have a strike, right? But also get a sense of what the rest of the world is thinking. And I have folks in my own family who are, not have not been born in America, but we have to think about things like the war on Gaza, right? Now, I don't think it was significant enough to have tipped the balance in favor of Trump versus Harris, but in my industry, and I do a lot of DEI work and management consulting work, and there are a lot of people who refuse to vote for Harris, even though they did not vote for Trump, but they also refused to vote for Harris because of her quote unquote policies in Israel and Gaza and Palestine. Now, I do think that this is a very complicated take, and I don't agree with it necessarily because, again, as vice president, I don't think she has sweeping power to enact certain policies on an international level in the same way that people think she does. But at the same time, the way that she addressed things like Israel and other things going on outside the US, people are scared, upset, and they don't understand that all of it ties together. So they're looking for someone to blame, and I think that it's a really easy pathway to blame someone who doesn't look like you or speak to you or sound like you when you can go to somebody who is feeding you what you want. And that's what we've seen happen as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just so much we can unpack there about how and why the election went the way it did, and all the policy issues as well, and the whole can of worms around the stance on the Middle East. There's so many moving parts that ultimately determined the outcome of this election, and I'd love to talk to you all in a lot more detail about that. But in the interest of time and tiredness, I'd like to just wrap up by kind of looking ahead and wondering what you all think the next 4 years are going to bring to you and to America.
It looks like a very dark 4 years ahead to me. What's been really interesting is the friends that I've been texting with and chatting with through the night and this morning. When the result became apparent, there was a sense of, well, we're in California, so we have some immunity, right? We're in a liberal state, and it's I think I don't know, I probably got it wrong, but California is like the fourth largest economy, and for years and years and years, there's actually been an initiative floated over and over again about Washington, Oregon, and California joining and then seceding from the Union. I've been hearing a lot of that this morning. And so we kind of feel like, oh, well, we have some immunity to whatever the crazy is going to be over the next 4 years, but I'm not sure about that. I think we are going to see an economic collapse, probably under Trump's tariffs. Certainly, we are going to be in an unsustainable economy because the tariffs will be passed on to the consumer. If we think we can't afford groceries now, just watch out for the next 2 years. I think it's going to be. Internationally, I think he's going to get us into some really difficult situations. Um, I do projects for the U.S. Forest Service as a historian, and under the Trump administration, they the U.S. Forest Service, USDA, was just gutted. And for instance, on the ground in this area, in about a 300-mile radius, they cut back. There was only one law enforcement officer for the forest for 300 miles. Now, under the Biden presidency, we have 8 law enforcement officers who've now come to the mountains to do our policing for us in the forest. And under Trump, we'll probably go back to 1 again, because they took all the funds, they gutted everything from USDA. So I know that my projects will be stalled for U.S. Forest Service because there will be serious cutbacks. We saw it in the 4 years with Trump before. So I think on the ground, we're going to see some really, really severe impacts from this presidency, just in very, very practical ways in the way that we live and the things that we do.
Well, I can understand the anger of, and I know when people say like blue states should secede, I know they're mostly joking because states can't and shouldn't secede, and just because you don't like the outcome of an election doesn't give anybody the right to just say we're gone. I think there's going to be a lot of cruelty. I'm optimistic. I think, the center will hold and we will survive. But I think now that Trump is unleashed and doesn't have to worry about re-election in 4 years and has done this once before, and he knows what he in his mind did wrong and did right. Now we're looking at a Trump 2.0. This is going to be a lot of trampling of dignity for a lot of people, and there's not a lot of people who are going to stand up to him. So the more we all do stand up to him, the better we'll be.
Yeah, I'll say I'm scared. Um, I'm tired. I know people. I've heard a lot of. I've been in touch, same as I'm sure a lot of you have, or all of you have been, with friends and community and family, and just touching base with people. And it's sentiments that, at least in my circles, are felt across the board. For some folks who are more privileged, while we may be feeling impacts like on the economic side, and in terms of our world affairs and things like that, in terms of day-to-day daily life, probably not much will change. Katie and I also live in a somewhat, very much a blue bubble as well, and that's something my husband and I were talking about this morning. And he's a straight white man, and I'm in some ways grateful that that's my partner right now. Which is something I hate to say as someone who is biracial themselves, but his point of view is that we live in Massachusetts, not much will change, we live in a bubble, it'll be okay. But what scares me is that with Trump in power at this point, given everything that Shannon and Nathan, you both shared just now, that we will be seeing not just lasting changes that are going to be deeply harmful in the next 4 years, but also for much, much longer. We have the Supreme Court that is at play, that he's already influenced dramatically. We have seen what it looks like when he guts our federal agencies, and I'm afraid for what that will look like in the future. He's already told us that he's going to put RFK Jr., a man who told the world that a worm ate his brain, that he's going to put that man in charge of public health. Climate change is a real situation. It is a beautiful, very unseasonably warm 70-something degree day right now in Massachusetts in November. It should not be like this right now. So I'm scared. I'm also afraid for my business. We have already been impacted quite dramatically in this year leading up to this election, and it really is a coin toss as to what will happen on that front. And I'm just worried for, folks that I'm in community with who are marginalized, who are from populations that are going to be deeply impacted by this, who do not have the privilege or the means or the opportunity to move or to take care of themselves in ways that they need to, and what that's going to look like. So, we will continue to fight and resist, but it is a very dark time ahead, I think.
I don't mean to sound hyperbolic, but I think a lot of people are going to die. Best case scenario, it's going to be a lot of women. And I'm saying this not to be cruel or to make fun of it, but I think it's going to be a lot of women who expect to be able to get access to healthcare during their pregnancy and think that there's going to be an exception for them, and who voted for Trump and will be shocked, and their families will be really shocked when they don't come home from the hospital, if they're even admitted to the hospital. I think depending on how seriously we can take him at his word, I think there might also be some political violence aimed at opposition. I wouldn't be surprised if there was something not quite pandemic like that happens again. However, if we do have JFK Jr. in charge of our Department of Health, then, I think we can all imagine what might happen if another coronavirus kind of thing were to pop up somewhere in the world. I think that it's going to be really important for those of us who are active and who are willing to stand up, because I think it's going to be really hard to go after more people than just a few dissidents. And I am truly very scared. I'm scared, not necessarily for myself. I'm a white woman who lives in Massachusetts. Like Felicia said, it's a very liberal state. I'm terrified for women in red states in the South. I'm terrified for members of marginalized groups. I keep thinking of that quote. I'm going to completely mess it up. Of someone in Nazi Germany who said, at first they came for this group and I wasn't part of that group, and so I didn't do anything. And then they went for this other group and I wasn't a member of that group, and so I didn't do anything. And then they came for my group and there was no one left. And I think it's so important for us going forward to truly stand up for every single group, even if they are the ones supporting Trump, to stand up and protect them from themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really powerful note to end on. And genuinely, this has been incredibly eye-opening for me, just to hear firsthand how the result of the election is affecting you all. And I thank you all for joining me to share that. I hope that our listeners have sort of found something from that as well. I don't know what the future's going to hold. I don't think any of us really do. But I think the next 4 years are going to be unpredictable and scary, and we're not going to be short of things to talk about. So I wish you all well, being US citizens at a time when I don't think any of us around the world are particularly comfortable with what's happening in your country at the moment. But thank you again for joining me on this to share that and really kind of hopefully get that across. So we're going to wrap up, and it's been a crazy day. It's been a really crazy day, and we are going to be back with the podcast on Saturday and following Tuesday and every week thereafter to continue breaking down the biggest issues and questions from American history, to try and understand and continue understanding what the heck is going on today. So thank you, Felicia, Katie, Nathan, Shannon, for joining me on this episode. And for anyone listening to this, do click follow so that all future episodes appear in your feed as well. And if you can take 10 seconds out of your day to just leave a rating and a review and just help us get up those algorithms, that makes us all very happy. But wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your week, get some sleep, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liam.
Thanks for listening to America, a history in the making. If you enjoy the show, please go and check out our main episodes, which drop every Tuesday, and we've linked to some relevant episodes in the show notes for you as well. Remember also to visit our Patreon page where you can support our show. For just a few dollars a month, you'll unlock some awesome perks, and it helps us to keep the show going, which we really appreciate. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, in Pod We Trust. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. And if you enjoy this and want more, remember you can support the show from as little as £1. All the details are in the show notes.